Order! Order in the court!
The Silent Witness opening hook, October 1975. A union leader walks out of his house and into the autumn twilight. He never comes home. No body, no witness, no answers. For 48 years, his family lives in a nightmare of not knowing, caught between grief and hope, between mourning and waiting. Then, in 2023, a detective reopens the cold case. What she finds in a forgotten basement changes everything. A black notebook filled with names, dates, and a chilling final entry written the day before he vanished. But the notebook is just the beginning. Because when she follows the trail of evidence, a DNA match from a single strand of hair, a blood-stained room hidden beneath concrete, a confession from a dying man, she uncovers a conspiracy that goes deeper than anyone imagined. This isn't a story about a missing person. This is a story about what happens when one honest man threatens a system built on corruption, about the price of speaking truth to power, and about a family that refused to let silence bury their father's legacy. Before we begin, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear will show you that some truths, no matter how long buried, will always find a way to speak. Part 1. The Last Walk, Riverside, Ohio, October 18, 1975. The Henderson family lived at 342 Maple Avenue, a modest two-story brick house in the working-class neighborhood that surrounded the massive Riverside steel mill. The street was lined with similar houses, all built in the 1940s for factory workers, all painted in muted colors that couldn't quite hide the soot and grime from decades of industrial smoke. Robert Henderson was 47 years old, president of the Riverside Steel Workers Union Local 447. He was a big man, 6'2", broad shoulders from years of factory work, hands calloused and scarred from molten metal and heavy machinery. His face was weathered, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes were sharp and unwavering. His wife, Claire, had married him in 1963, drawn to his fierce intelligence and unshakable principles. Their daughter, Sarah, was 12 years old, quiet, bookish, her father's favorite person to debate politics with over Sunday breakfast. That Saturday started like any other weekend. Robert woke at 6 a.m., brewed strong black coffee, and sat at the kitchen table reading the union's financial reports. Claire found him there an hour later, his forehead creased with worry. "What's wrong?" she asked, pouring her own coffee. Robert didn't look up. "The numbers don't add up. Someone's been moving money around, large amounts, and the signatures on the approval forms." He trailed off, jaw tight. "Have you talked to anyone about this?" "I'm meeting with someone this afternoon, someone who might have answers." Claire felt a chill. "Robert, if there's something wrong with the union finances, then I need to know before I accuse anyone publicly." He finally looked at her, his expression softening. "Don't worry, it's probably just an accounting error." But Claire knew her husband. She knew that tone, the one he used when he was trying to protect her from something dangerous. At 3:47 p.m., Robert kissed Claire goodbye at the front door. He was wearing his brown leather jacket, the one with the small tear at the collar that Claire kept meaning to fix. He carried his worn briefcase, the same one he'd had since his first day as union president. "I'll be back by 7, he said. "We can take Sarah to that new pizza place she's been talking about." "Be careful," Claire said, something tightening in her chest. Robert smiled, that rare, genuine smile he reserved for her. "Always am." He walked to his car, a bronze 1972 Ford LTD, got in, and drove away. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. That was the last time Claire Henderson saw her husband alive. Part 2. The Disappearance. When Robert hadn't returned by 8 p.m., Claire called the Union Hall. No one had seen him since he'd left earlier that afternoon. By 10 p.m., she was pacing the living room, checking the window every few minutes. Sarah sat on the stairs, watching her mother with growing anxiety. At 11:30 p.m., Claire called the police. "My husband left the house at 3:47 this afternoon. He said he'd be back by 7. He's never late, not once in 12 years of marriage. Something's wrong. The dispatcher was sympathetic, but not particularly concerned. Ma'am, it's only been a few hours. Adults are allowed to— I know my husband, Claire interrupted, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. If he's not home, it's because he can't get home. The police opened a missing persons case the next morning. Detective Frank Morrison was assigned, a veteran cop nearing retirement who'd seen dozens of missing persons cases over his career. Most of them resolved within 48 hours. People got drunk, got in accidents, had affairs, ran away from debt. But Robert Henderson didn't fit any of those profiles. Morrison interviewed Claire first. She was composed, methodical, providing exact details: what Robert was wearing, what he'd said before leaving, the phone numbers of everyone he might have contacted. Did your husband have any enemies? Morrison asked. Claire hesitated. Robert was uncompromising. In labor negotiations, he never backed down. He'd made management angry more than once. And there were people within the union who thought he was too rigid. Anyone specific? Marcus Brennan, the union's financial officer. Robert had been questioning some of his accounting decisions. They'd argued about it at the last executive meeting. Morrison made a note. Anyone else? Victor Cross. He owns a trucking company that works with the mill. Robert had been pushing for better safety standards for the drivers. Cross thought Robert was trying to put him out of business. Over the next week, Morrison interviewed union members, mill management, and Robert's known associates. Everyone had the same basic story. Robert was principled, stubborn, and had made his share of enemies. But no one could imagine him just walking away from his family. On October 25th, 1 week after Robert's disappearance, a farmer named Dale Tucker called the police. He'd been checking his fence line near Route 14, about 15 miles outside Riverside, when he'd found a bronze Ford LTD abandoned in an overgrown lot behind an old grain silo. The car's engine was cold, the doors were locked, the keys were in the ignition. Inside, everything was in order. Robert's briefcase on the passenger seat, his wallet in the glove compartment, even loose change in the cup holder. But Robert Henderson was nowhere to be found. The police searched the surrounding area: fields, woods, abandoned buildings. They brought in tracking dogs. They checked every hospital, morgue, and homeless shelter within a 100-mile radius. Nothing. It was as if Robert had simply ceased to exist the moment he parked that car. Detective Morrison filed his report. Subject Robert Henderson, missing, presumed voluntary departure or foul play. No body recovered. Case remains open, pending new evidence. Claire refused to accept it. My husband didn't abandon us. Someone took him. Someone killed him. But with no body, no witnesses, no evidence of a crime, there was nothing more the police could do. The case went cold. Part 3. The Years of Silence. The Henderson house on Maple Avenue became a tomb of memory. Claire kept everything exactly as Robert had left it. His jacket still hung by the door. His coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter. His reading glasses rested on the stack of union reports he'd been reviewing that last morning. Sarah grew up in the shadow of her father's absence. She stopped asking questions after the first year, not because she'd accepted it, but because she saw how much pain the questions caused her mother. Claire never remarried. She never dated. She worked as a librarian, lived quietly, and spent every October 18th, the anniversary of Robert's disappearance, lighting a candle in the front window. In case he's trying to find his way home, she told Sarah once. So he knows we're still here. Sarah went to college, became a journalist, got married, had a son of her own. But she never stopped thinking about her father, never stopped wondering what had happened that autumn afternoon in 1975. In 2008, she convinced Claire to let her write an article about Robert's disappearance for the Riverside Chronicle. The piece was titled, "The Man Who Vanished, 33 Years Later, A Family Still Searches for Answers." It generated some interest locally. A few tips came in, none leading anywhere. But mostly, it was another reminder that Riverside had moved on. The steel mill had closed in 1989. The Union Hall had been converted to a community center. The people who'd known Robert were dying off or moving away. The case faded back into obscurity. Until 2023, when a young detective named Maya Reeves pulled an old cardboard box from the evidence room and found something everyone else had missed. Part 4. The Cold Case Detective. Maya Reeves was 31 years old, passionate about cold cases, and convinced that modern forensic technology could solve mysteries that had stumped previous generations. She'd been assigned to the Riverside Police Department as newly formed Cold Case Unit, a two-person team with a shoestring budget and access to the department's massive backlog of unsolved cases. Maya had a system. She'd take cases from before 1990, before DNA testing was standard, and submit any preserved physical evidence for modern analysis. In March 2023, she submitted samples from 12 different cases. In April, the results came back. 11 were inconclusive or showed no useful DNA. But the 12th, a pair of worn leather work gloves found in 2004 during the demolition of an old Union storage facility, showed a clear match. Robert Henderson. 99.7% probability. Maya sat at her desk, staring at the report. The gloves had been found sealed in a wooden box along with a handwritten note. RH, don't forget. No one had known what it meant. No one had connected it to Robert Henderson's case because the box had no other identifying information. Until now. Maya spent the next 2 weeks reviewing every document in Robert's case file. She read Detective Morrison's original reports, interviewed transcripts, newspaper clippings. She studied maps of the area where his car had been found. She traced his known movements on the day he disappeared. And then she made a decision. She was going to solve this case. Her first call was to Sarah Henderson Park, now 60 years old, living in Columbus with her husband and adult son. Mrs. Park, my name is Detective Maya Reeves. I'm calling about your father, Robert Henderson. There was a long silence on the line. My father disappeared 48 years ago, Sarah said carefully. Why are you calling now? Because I found evidence, DNA evidence, that suggests your father didn't just vanish. Something happened to him, something someone tried very hard to hide. Another silence. What kind of evidence? Sarah's voice was shaking now. Work gloves, found in an old Union storage facility. Your father's DNA is inside them, skin cells, sweat, which means he wore them shortly before he disappeared. And Mrs. Park? Maya paused. There's blood on them too. Not much, but enough to test. Is it my father's blood? We're running that test now, but there's something else. The gloves were sealed in a box with a note. Someone wanted them preserved. Someone wanted them found eventually. Who? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. 2 days later, Maya drove to Columbus to meet Sarah and her mother, Claire, now 88 years old, still living in the house on Maple Avenue with Sarah's help. Maya brought the evidence photos, the gloves, the wooden box, the note. Claire's hands trembled as she held the photographs. Those are Robert's gloves. I recognized the tear in the thumb. He caught it on a piece of machinery and I kept meaning to repair it. Sarah leaned forward. Detective, what do you think happened? Maya hesitated. She'd developed a theory, but it was dark. Very dark. I think your father discovered something. Probably financial corruption within the union. I think he was going to expose it. And I think someone stopped him. Killed him? Yes. And then hid his body so well that no one's found it in 48 years. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. Can you find him? Can you bring him home? Maya looked at the elderly woman, at the lifetime of grief etched into her face, and made a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. I'm going to try. Part 5. The Black Notebook. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Sarah's basement. After Maya's visit, Sarah had started going through her mother's house more systematically. Claire had kept everything of Robert's, every document, every photograph, every scrap of paper he'd ever touched. Most of it was mundane: union newsletters, political pamphlets, family letters. But in a locked filing cabinet in the basement, the key to which Claire had kept on a chain around her neck for 48 years, Sarah found something extraordinary: a small black leather notebook. The cover was unmarked. The pages were filled with Robert's precise handwriting: dates, names, dollar amounts, cryptic notes. September 3, 1975. Brennan diverted $47,000 to operational expenses. No documentation. September 19, 1975. Cross-meeting with Brennan at Riverside Diner, 11 p.m. Why secret? October 10, 1975. Confirmed. Union pension fund shorted by $180,000 over 18 months. October 15, 1975. Meeting with J.K. tomorrow. He says he has proof. Riverside Quarry, 4 p.m. October 16, 1975. This page was torn out. Sarah called Maya immediately. I found my father's investigation notes. He was tracking union corruption. Specifically, someone named Brennan was stealing from the pension fund. Maya was at Sarah's house within 2 hours. She photographed every page of the notebook, then took it as evidence. Marcus Brennan, Maya said, reading the notes. Your mother mentioned him in her original statement. He was the union's financial officer. Is he still alive? Maya pulled up her laptop, ran a search. Marcus Brennan, age 77, living in Phoenix, Arizona. Retired in 1992. Do you think he killed my father? I think he's the first person we need to talk to. But before Maya could book a flight to Arizona, she got a call from the forensics lab. Detective Reeves, we got the blood test results from those gloves. It's a match, Robert Henderson's blood. But there's something else. We found trace amounts of concrete dust in the blood, and the chemical composition suggests it's from a specific type of industrial concrete that was only manufactured between 1970 and 1978. Maya's mind raced. Can you tell me what buildings in Riverside might have used that concrete? We can do better than that. There's a database of industrial construction from that era. Give us a few hours. 3 hours later, Maya had a list of 12 buildings in Riverside that had used that specific concrete mixture. Most were demolished. A few had been converted to other uses. But one stood out: Riverside Quarry Office Building, abandoned, 1982. The same quarry mentioned in Robert's notebook, the place where he was supposed to meet J.K. on October 16th. Maya gathered her team. The next morning, they were going to search that building, and what they found there would finally, after 48 years, bring Robert Henderson home. Part 6. The Hidden Grave. The Riverside Quarry had been abandoned for over 40 years. The massive pit where limestone had once been extracted was now filled with murky water. The equipment buildings were collapsing, reclaimed by nature. But the main office building, a squat concrete structure with barred windows, still stood, locked and forgotten at the edge of the property. Maya's team arrived at dawn. They had ground-penetrating radar equipment, forensic specialists, and a warrant to search the entire property. The office building's front door was rusted shut. They had to use bolt cutters to get through. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Broken furniture, moldy papers, the detritus of a business that had closed decades ago. But in the basement, they found something that made Maya's blood run cold. A concrete floor that had clearly been poured in sections, with one section notably newer than the rest, despite being decades old. Here, the radar technician said, pointing to his screen. There's a void under this section, roughly 6 feet long, 2 feet wide. Maya felt her throat tighten. The dimensions of a human body. They broke through the concrete carefully, jackhammers and chisels, treating it like an archaeological dig. 4 feet down, they hit something that wasn't rock, fabric, leather, bone. Robert Henderson had been buried beneath the basement floor of the Riverside Quarry office building. His body was wrapped in plastic sheeting, dressed in the same brown leather jacket Claire remembered from that last day. In his jacket pocket, they found his wallet, still containing his driver's license, photos of Claire and Sarah, and a small handwritten note. "If you're reading this, I'm dead. Brennan and Cross are stealing from the pension fund. I have proof, hidden in my house, basement filing cabinet. The key is with Claire. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't come home. Tell Sarah I love her. Robert." Maya stood in that basement, tears streaming down her face, and called Sarah. "We found him. Your father. He's been here all along." Part 7. The Confession. Marcus Brennan was arrested in Phoenix 2 days later. He didn't fight extradition. When Maya interviewed him at the Riverside Police Department, he was calm, almost relieved. "I knew this day would come eventually," he said. "I've been waiting for it. Tell me what happened on October 16, 1975. Brennan sighed deeply. "Robert found out about the money. I'd been skimming from the pension fund. Not a lot at first, just enough to cover some personal debts. But it got bigger, and Victor Cross knew about it. He was blackmailing me, threatening to tell Robert unless I helped him avoid union safety inspections." "So you decided to kill Robert?" "No." Brennan's voice broke. "I wanted to pay him off, make it go away. But Victor had a different plan. He said Robert would never stay quiet, that he was too honest, too stubborn. He said we had to eliminate the threat." "What happened at the quarry?" "Victor told Robert he had proof of the corruption, that he wanted to help expose it. Robert believed him. He came to the quarry office to meet Victor, but when he got there, Victor wasn't alone. He'd hired 2 men. I don't know their names. Victor handled that. Brennan couldn't continue. "They killed him? They beat him, badly. Robert fought back. He was strong. He didn't go down easy. But there were 3 of them. When it was over, Victor told me we had to hide the body. He said if anyone found out, we'd all go to prison." "So you buried him in the basement?" "Victor did. I just stood there. I didn't help, but I didn't stop it either. And then we sealed the concrete and walked away." "What about the gloves? The ones in the union storage facility?" Brennan looked confused. "What gloves?" Maya showed him the evidence photo. "I've never seen those before," Brennan said. "They weren't part of... We didn't leave evidence. Victor was meticulous about that. Maya realized someone else had preserved those gloves, someone who knew what had happened and wanted the truth to eventually surface." "Is Victor Cross still alive?" Maya asked. "He died in 2019. Lung cancer. Anyone else involved?" Brennan shook his head. "Just the 3 of us, and the 2 men Victor hired, but I never knew who they were." The confession was recorded, witnessed, and signed. Marcus Brennan was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. At 77 years old, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. But Maya still had one question. Who had saved those gloves? Part 8. The Silent Witness. The answer came from an unexpected source. A letter delivered to Maya's office 3 weeks after Marcus Brennan's arrest. It was handwritten, postmarked from Toledo, Ohio, with no return address. "Dear Detective Reeves, my name is Jonathan Kramer. I was Robert Henderson's friend and colleague at the Riverside Steelworkers Union. I'm writing this because I'm 84 years old and dying of heart disease. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. I need to confess something I've carried for 48 years. I knew Robert was investigating Marcus and Victor. He asked me to help, to keep copies of financial documents as backup evidence. I agreed because I trusted Robert and believed he was doing the right thing. On October 16, 1975, Robert called me around 3 p.m. He said he was meeting Victor at the quarry office, that Victor claimed to have proof of the corruption. I had a bad feeling about it. Victor was dangerous. Everyone knew it, but no one had the courage to stand up to him. I drove to the quarry after my shift ended, around 6 p.m. I parked down the road and walked up quietly. I saw Victor's truck there, and another vehicle I didn't recognize. I heard shouting from inside the office building. Then I heard Robert scream. I should have called the police. I should have done something. But I was a coward. I waited outside, hiding, until I saw Victor and two other men leave. They were carrying something heavy wrapped in plastic. After they drove away, I went inside. The basement was a mess. Blood on the floor, Robert's briefcase knocked over. I found his work gloves by the water heater. They had blood on them. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. So I took the gloves, sealed them in a box, and hid them in the union storage facility. I wrote a note, RH, don't forget, because I knew someday someone would find them. Someone who would care enough to investigate. I never told anyone. Not the police, not Robert's family, not anyone. I was afraid Victor would kill me too, so I stayed silent and let Robert's family suffer for nearly half a century. I can't undo that, but I can tell you the truth now, at the end of my life. I hope it brings some closure to Robert's family, and I hope, wherever Robert is, he can forgive me for being too weak to help him when it mattered. Jonathan Kramer. Maya immediately tried to contact Jonathan Kramer. But when she called the number listed in the Toledo phone directory, a woman answered, his daughter. My father passed away 2 days ago, she said quietly. He died peacefully in his sleep. Maya closed her eyes. I'm sorry for your loss. Your father wrote me a letter, a confession about a case I've been investigating. Did he talk to you about Robert Henderson? Every year on October 18th, my father would go to his study and sit there for hours. He wouldn't talk to anyone. My mother always said he was mourning a friend, but he never told us the details until last month, when he knew he was dying. What did he tell you? That he'd witnessed a murder? That he'd hidden evidence because he was too afraid to come forward? That he'd lived with that guilt every day for 48 years? He said the letter he wrote you was the only thing that gave him peace at the end. Epilogue. Coming Home. November 12th, 2023. Riverside, Ohio. The funeral for Robert Henderson was held at St. Michael's Church, the same church where he and Claire had been married 60 years earlier. The casket was closed. After 48 years buried in concrete, there wasn't much left to view, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that Robert was finally home. Claire sat in the front row holding Sarah's hand. She was 88 years old now, frail and white-haired, but her eyes were clear. She'd lived to see this day, the day she could finally say goodbye. Sarah spoke at the service, her voice steady despite her tears. My father was taken from us on October 18th, 1975. For 48 years we didn't know where he was or what had happened to him. We lived in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn because we couldn't let go of hope. She looked at Maya, sitting in the third row. Detective Reeves gave us something precious, the truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than not knowing. Sarah pulled out the note they'd found in Robert's jacket pocket and read it aloud. Tell Claire I'm sorry I couldn't come home. Tell Sarah I love her. Her voice broke. We heard you, Dad, and we love you too. After the service, Robert was buried next to his mother in Riverside Memorial Cemetery. The headstone read, Robert James Henderson, 1928-1975. Union leader, husband, father. He chose truth over silence. Claire stood at the grave for a long time after everyone else had left. Sarah tried to guide her away, but Claire shook her head. Just a few more minutes, she whispered. Sarah stepped back, giving her mother space. Claire knelt slowly, her joints protesting, and placed her hand on the freshly turned earth. I waited for you, she said softly. Every day for 48 years I waited, and you're finally home. She stayed there until the sun began to set, just as it had on that October day in 1975, when Robert had walked out the door for the last time. But this time, Claire knew where he was. And that, after half a century of not knowing, was everything. The truth about Jonathan Kramer. 3 months after Robert's funeral, Maya received a package in the mail. It was from Jonathan Kramer's daughter. Inside was a shoebox full of documents. The financial records Robert had asked Jonathan to keep as backup evidence. Bank statements showing the theft from the pension fund. Invoices from Victor Cross's trucking company that had never been paid. Meeting notes in Robert's handwriting. And at the bottom of the box, a letter from Jonathan to his daughter, written shortly before his death. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I want you to send these documents to Detective Reeves. They're the proof Robert died trying to expose. He deserved better than the cowardice I showed him. In my last act, let me at least give him justice. Using those documents, federal investigators were able to trace the stolen pension funds. They discovered that Marcus Brennan had embezzled over $400,000 over a 10-year period, money that should have gone to retired union members. The remaining funds were recovered and distributed to the victims' families. Several received checks for tens of thousands of dollars in back payments. At the ceremony announcing the recovery, Sarah spoke on behalf of the families. My father died fighting for the rights of working people. He died because he refused to let corruption steal from those who'd worked their entire lives. Because of his sacrifice, and because of Detective Reeves's determination, justice has finally been served. Maya stood in the back of the room, watching the families receive their checks. She thought about Robert Henderson, buried for 48 years beneath concrete. She thought about Claire, who'd waited a lifetime to bring her husband home. She thought about Jonathan Kramer, who'd lived with guilt until his final days. And she thought about truth, how it could be buried, suppressed, hidden for decades, but never completely erased. Someone always remembered. Someone always knew. And eventually, if you looked hard enough, the truth would speak. Author's note. This story is inspired by real cases of labor leaders who were killed for standing up against corruption in the mid-20th century. While Robert Henderson and his family are fictional, the circumstances of his disappearance, union corruption, corporate intimidation, and the silencing of whistleblowers reflect genuine dangers faced by labor organizers during this era. The story reminds us that institutions are only as honest as the people who run them, and that silence, whether from fear, complicity, or indifference, can be as destructive as active wrongdoing. Robert Henderson chose truth over safety. Jonathan Kramer chose fear over courage, and spent 48 years living with that choice. Detective Maya Reeves chose persistence over comfort, and gave a family the closure they'd waited half a century to receive. We all face these choices at different scales in our lives. The question is, which will we make? If this story moved you, subscribe to join us in telling more stories about forgotten cases, silenced voices, and the people who refuse to let truth stay buried. The end.